hearing what you have to share with us today. I will have you maybe make an opening dua, but before we get into the lecture proper, I would like to do a poll asking the audience what they hope to expect from today's event, but I'll pass on the mic to you before I jump into the poll.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everyone. It's a pleasure being here and to share with you some thoughts and ideas on a subject which is really, really important. When the theme of this seminar was mentioned to me, I really thought that it is something worth talking about and then reflecting on, because it's really at the heart of what we do, especially in the non-voluntary sector and as Muslims. And so it's wonderful to share some ideas on this, but also to listen to your questions and comments and ideas about some of the features of this particular issue as well. So something I'm looking forward to, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Dr. Riza. So everyone in the audience, I've put a link in the chat box, and I want to know what your expectations are for today's event. I think this is also quite interesting for Dr. Riza to know, so he knows how to kind of frame his answers to the questions. So that's a benefit to all of us today, inshallah. So if you follow that link and enter the passcode that I've posted in the chat box, and then Zainab will share her screen so we can all see the responses. So Zainab, I'm ready when you are. Yeah, so just as a reminder, our topic today is giving your all to Allah. And some of the questions, just to prompt you, are: what does it mean to give your all to Allah? Why do you have to give your all to Allah? What will happen if you choose not to give your all in Allah's cause? And ways in which you can give your all to Allah and how it would affect your well-being. So these are some of the questions that we want to, the themes that will lead today's seminar or lecture, inshallah. So I'll just give another 2 minutes. But even after we take off the poll, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box. And we always find that the more interactive the audience are, the better. So I'll leave this on for another 2 minutes, inshallah. How to aspire a call to action. Oh, sorry, apologies. How to inspire a call to action. Okay. Okay, some in the chat box. How to know if I'm giving my all to Allah. Yes, inshallah, by the end of our session today, we hope that you would have a better idea. Okay, assuming you want to be educated and inspired. No pressure, Dr. Riza. People are looking for inspiration. What else is there? All right, 1 more minute. Thank you so much for your being interactive, everyone. What does it mean to do so? Okay, so I feel like we're all looking for the how. Interestingly enough, I think the why is also important. Like, why do we have to? So these are all the things we'll be covering, inshallah. All right, thank you to everyone who participated in this. So inshallah, we'll start. I'll start asking Dr. Riza some questions. Zainab, you can stop sharing. Thank you. All right, bismillah. So my first question for you, Dr. Riza, is what does it actually mean to give your all to Allah? I'd really appreciate if you use some examples or anecdotes when answering this question. Thank you.
I think the first thing really is to think about Islam. What exactly is Islam all about? And what is the linkage between Islam and ibadah or worship? We know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came and he brought not only a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he also brought a method. So Islam is both and what the Prophet brought was both a message and a method in terms of the way that things ought to be done. So whenever we reflect upon what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be giving all for Allah, we reflect upon the model which has been left for us in that of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we know that if we think about what he did and how he spent those 23 years of prophethood before he passed away, I think what we would note is that even though it was a divine message and it was sent to him, and he was the privileged one to receive that message, to be the recipient of the message, we find that it did not mean that he did not have to sacrifice. He did not have to undergo great tests and trials and tribulations. He did not have, all of these things were part of his life. So by having or by being somebody who decides that they would like to convey the message of Islam, inherently means that you will become somebody who has an additional burden, additional responsibility, and by its very nature would lead to sacrifice. And if we understand the meaning of the word ibadah, which I mentioned as being that of worship, which is a comprehensive term, which is all-inclusive, and it entails, in essence, every single aspect of our life. In a sense, what we are saying is that everything about our life is one of worship. Everything is our life is one of behaving in a particular way, and is having a behavior which is one which is filled with consistency to the message or to the words that we speak, and also the character, our of a behavioral pattern is one is also which is model in nature. So we are models at all stages. Before I go on, I just wanted to talk about a word that we use very often, which is the word fi sabilillah. Fi sabilillah. So we talk about doing things for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the question is, when you do what you do, are there some things that you do which are not fi sabilillah, and are there some things which you do which are fi sabilillah? Is it that if you engage in something which is ritual in nature, like prayer, like fasting, like delivering the message to non-Muslims, da'wah, is that what fi sabilillah is, or does fi sabilillah include every single aspect of your life? So it's something to think about, because we tend to use the word sometimes selectively when we speak about what it is that we do. So I wanted to put some of those, sort of concepts out there for us to begin to understand. And you asked about the question about, give an example of what giving all for Allah means. And the example I can think of really is that of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam. When we think about his life and we think about him as a role model, what we do realize that, his entire life was captivated by the idea of trying to share the message, to spread the message, that he understood what his duty and his responsibility was, and whenever he got that opportunity, and it's not that he was just passively looking if people came to him, but rather he was actively reaching out. So proactivity was one of the hallmarks of his life. we can describe Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam as the, in a sense, as the first international da'iyah, in the sense that he was somebody who he did not limit the work that he did to where he lived, but rather he was somebody who, you know, he wandered, he reached out, he looked for different communities, and he even, in a sense, was trying to set up institutions. So in the mindset of Prophet Ibrahim was the idea of institutional building. So when you think about what he was doing when he was building the Kaaba, it was not just that he was building a structure where people, but he was looking at it as a place for people to assemble, for people from all walks to come together to be able to worship. And he knew that if it is that he were to institutionalize the idea of faith, the idea of Islam, that it is something that will remain for, for a long time. And even so, when he was building the Kaaba, we can record in the Quran that hand in hand with him doing what he did was his son, Ismail. Because he knew that Ismail, in a sense, would outlive him. And therefore, Ismail had to be part of that mission also. And his wife, Hajar, I mean, she also had to be part of that. So that sense of laying roots down, of thinking, out of the box, of trying to realize that everything that you do at the end of the day boils down to that of dawah, that of ibadah, is something which reflects in his life. And I think if we look at the life of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we would realize that the same refers to him as well, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Dr. Rizza. Why is it necessary to give your all to Allah? Again, please shed some light on this by using examples. Why is it necessary to give your all to Allah?
I think for many reasons. One, you can talk about it firstly in terms of what if we don't, what will become of us? And when we do, what happens to us? And I think if you think about it, by the mere fact that we have declared the Shahada and we have entered into Islam, in a sense, obligates us to want to be able to do things that will please him. So from the very beginning, earning the pleasure of Allah becomes something that it's a vision and a goal that we have in mind. And that's really the vision of the believer. The believer, when he thinks about his life and what his mission is and everything that he does, he is certainly trying to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So part of that, in a sense, we can say contractual obligation that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that of giving and that of sacrificing. Because in essence, what we have is not, it doesn't belong to us. We are custodians of what we have. We are people who, this is an amana, it's a trust. And what we think that belongs to us, or when we think that we have something, whether it be our time, our person, our resources, we might think that we earn it, but rarely have we. And where did it come from? And ultimately it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one is that of it's a contractual obligation. And as I mentioned before, built into the idea of Shahada is that of bearing witness. And bearing witness means that, you have to begin that process of giving all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because ultimately he's the one that we are all responsible to. We're going to go back to him, and we are going to be asked about everything that we do in this world. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that when we think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to do, even from the pillars of faith, or we think about our prayer or fasting, all of the things that we are obligated to do, we begin to realize that all of those are what we can describe as being means towards an end. And that in a sense, when we think about praying, it's not an act that is something which is done merely as an act, but it is something which has a higher motive and higher intention, a higher purpose, and that being to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in a sense, what we're saying is that when we do all of those things, it prepares us to do something else. So the real worship or the real ibadah is not necessarily just in the prayer or in the fasting, but the real worship and ibadah comes afterwards, when we have to learn the lessons of what we have done and then begin to put that into practice. Now, I wanted to mention some things because sometimes they can be a point of, let's say, a clash in terms of when we think about doing things for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing things, and where does our ego fit into the whole thing? Because sometimes it's when you do things for, let's say we engage in Islamic activity, there are some things we feel good about ourselves. We are able to make friends, we're able to do what it is that we do. You know, sometimes we people they applaud us for what we have done. So there's those things which also involved our ego in a sense. But then we need to know how does that fit in terms of gaining the pleasure of Allah? Because sometimes everything that you do may not necessarily have one intent. It could be multiple intents. And one might be that of, well, I'm doing something which will help our community. But another intent might be, well, you know, if I get involved in this, then the community will know me. I might be able to, you know, help myself in other ways. So it's something to think about. And that brings into the whole question what the Quran talks about, in that of ikhlas or sincerity, and doing something which has multiple motives is something which we need to be really careful about. And as much as it might help us in one way, we need to always be focused on reminding ourselves what is the central motive in doing what it is that we do. And one of the examples that I can draw from the Quran is one where there was some amongst the Quraysh who were thinking to themselves, well, why don't we, you know, the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, wants us to do certain things. So he wants us to worship in a particular way. And they were keen to become Muslims. But then they also had this attachment to the idols. So they were thinking to themselves, well, we can worship this God of Muhammad, upon whom be peace, worship him, but we can also worship our idols at the same time. And therefore, if there is some good to be derived from that form of worship, then we will benefit from it. And if our idols can still help us in any way, we would not have displeased them, which is really interesting in terms of the way that they were looking at it. Well, let's get the best of both worlds. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was very defiant in the Quran in the response to this particular attitude, saying that he does not accept anything which is divided in its nature, that what he accepts is something which is done wholly and for him and for him alone. That if it's divided, then it's done for another entity, but there is no reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think it's something to think about, you know, while we engage in what we do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rizza. Thank you for the examples as well. The next question is, when can one actually start giving his or all to Allah? Does it have to be at a particular age? Like, at what point should you realize that, right, it's time for me to give my all to Allah?
I think it's from the moment of cognition. I mean, the moment that you begin to realize that, look,
Somebody.
Daddy. these are the obligations. Then that's the point. There is no particular age. Some people even go to the extreme sometimes and think, well, look, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam became again the prophethood at 40, and therefore 40 is the ideal age to be able to start doing something. This is not the case. Others may say, well, look, once I do my Hajj and I become a Haji, then maybe that is the time. I'm a pure soul, and therefore that's a time to be engaged. But I think the key point in all of this is to know that none of us knows how long we will remain in this world, and that we are all going to die, and the age, and that is the unknown that nobody knows except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's important for us to realize that every day that goes by is one day less in our life and one day closer to meeting our maker. And therefore, what it is that you can do now is you need to do. You need to start. You need to be able to make that effort. You need to be able to make that decision and have that sense of resolve and begin to do it. So in terms of, is there a specific age for the age of calling as such? No, it's not. But as soon as you recognize that, you need to get engaged and you need to be thinking proactively what it is that I can do. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking necessarily at what it is that you have accomplished, but it's the effort that you make. It's the effort and it's the way that you go about doing things. That's what is going to be rewarded. Of course, what you do, you want to get the best results. But the best results at the end of the day lies in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think, as by way of examples, when we look at the life of the Sahaba, we realize that all of them did not live to the same age. All of them, even though they embraced Islam at different points in the prophetic mission, and some of them were given the opportunity to be part of the prophetic movement for a limited period, and some of them were given many years. Some of them outlived the life of the Prophet. So if we take the example of the companion Mus'ab ibn Umair, a young man who in the heart of Makkah, of the message when it was being spread in Makkah, when there was great animosity and against the Prophet and his message, and many of the Sahaba were being persecuted, that's the time that he became Muslim in a very hostile environment. And he was given great responsibility in terms of delivering the message, and which he did with outstanding results, both in Makkah, in when he made the hijrah, and also when he was sent by the ambassador of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina, where he laid the foundations for the Muslims entry into Medina. Without the efforts of Mus'ab ibn Umair as a young man, Islam may not have spread as quickly as it did. So that's just an example of, it didn't matter. The Prophet could have said, well, look, who is the eldest amongst us? So who is the ones who became Muslim first? Let them play particular roles. But he looked at people, he looked at how talented they were, and therefore he began to, and he accepted the responsibility. So Mus'ab ibn Umair is really a good example of a young person who really took on the responsibility at an early age. But then we have others as well. We had different roles that Abu Bakr played, or that Umar played, or that Uthman played, and that Ali as a young person played throughout the prophetic mission. And then there were many who lived even beyond that, people like Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, beyond that, to be able to cement that message and to be able to go to different parts of the Arabian Peninsula to be able to share that message, and that is something which was there. So thinking about the Sahaba, thinking about what we need to do, but there is no particular age as such. And we just have to, once we realize that, we have to sort of start and get on with things, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Can you give some practical examples of how we can actually start to give our all to Allah?
Yes, I think if we think about it to begin with, making that, one of the things that we don't realize that we do over and over again is that we are continuously renewing our faith. That in a sense, that when you enter into Islam and embrace Islam, it's what that means in essence, it's a commitment. And that commitment goes through a process of renewal continuously. And it's interesting when we think about that commitment that we make, it's termed the Shahada because it's bearing witness. And bearing witness is not something that you do just for yourself, but you do something that you bear witness to the rest of the community and those around you. So being able to understand and appreciate your Shahada and that commitment that you make is important. And when I talk about that commitment, it undergoes a process of continuous renewal. What I mean by that is that if you think about the prayer that we perform, the adhan that we make, the tashahhud that we do in each of our prayers, we realize that we are continuously echoing the words of the Shahada over and over again. And in a sense, it's what that represents for us is a means of recommitment of our faith. We are all continuously recommitting ourselves to what is our mission, what is our goals. And we can describe those that we do continuously as micro-affirmations. They are micro-affirmations to help us to continuously align ourselves with our true mission and vision in life. And by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking us to do these things at fixed times during the course of the day, what we are doing in essence is to continuously reaffirming what it is that we are about, what it is that we are after, who it is that we're trying to please, how it is that we're meant to be doing things. And that's really important, because sometimes we can take it for granted that it's another prayer, not realizing the impact that the prayer has to have in our life and what it is that we do. So in terms of where to start, it's about starting always and thinking about the beginning, which is the Shahada itself. Then the other thing is to be able to always, if we look at our books of prophetic traditions, most of the main book, in fact, all of them, when we look at them, is that the very first saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is there, is that of innamal a'malu binniyat, which is really interesting, because what that in essence is telling us that at the heart of everything is not just what you do, but it's your motive. And you need to be questioning your motive and reaffirming your motive all of the time. So having that clear intent is something which is important. And I've already mentioned the role of ikhlas, or that of sincerity, in terms of what it is that we do. The next thing that we do is that sometimes when we begin that we have a responsibility and we want to get things done. So let's say, for instance, you suddenly realize that there is massive poverty in a particular area, in a particular community, and you want to try and do something about it. So we become, in a sense, very emotional about what needs to be done. So we're very, very emotional, and we want to do everything, not realizing that, you can't do everything at the same time, and there's only so much we can do. So perhaps the best way to think about doing things is planning. And when we look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we notice that one of the key things about everything that he did, there was always a plan. Not just a plan, there was keen, detailed planning, but there was also backup plan alternatives. Well, what if something went wrong? What is the alternative? What shall we do next? If there are different ways of doing things, what is the easiest and best way to be able to accomplish a particular thing? You know, it's like going to the mosque. And if it is that you live 3 miles from the mosque, some people can say, well, look, the best way to do it is to walk. Well, it might be good to walk. Well, what are the benefits of doing it? Could be good for your health. It's a good way of exercising. But how much time is it going to take? Or it's going to take this amount of time? Can you afford to do it for 5 times per day? Do you have an alternative means of transport? Can you utilize that? And if you do so, then you might be able to use some of your time that you have available to you in a better way. So it's about thinking always about all the different alternatives. There's not always one way to do it. We do know that the method that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ chose in all things is that he would, if there are 2 ways of doing things, he would choose the easier way of getting things done. So choosing the easier way is one thing. And then when we look at his guidance further, he says that one, it is that the best actions done by the believer are those which are little, but they are consistent. In other words, what you want to see is consistency in terms of what you do, and not necessarily volume. So the volume might be small, the volume might be not as much as you would ideally like, but if there is consistency, then that's the way that you should go forward. And then with consistency, then you can always increase on the volume over time. The next thing we in terms of starting is also to realize that what we're aiming for is not mediocrity, but what we're aiming for is excellence, as you've already mentioned in your introduction, that what we're looking for is that of al-ihsan, which is that excellence in everything that we do. And unfortunately, sometimes if you look at the way we live our lives, is that sometimes this dedication to an attitude towards excellence is something that we do it in different ways, or some things we want excellence in, but other things we are happy to accept mediocrity or something which is less than what we would like. So if we were to compare, for instance, let's say the way that our homes are and the way that the mosque is, sometimes you might say, well, look, in our homes, it must be dust-free, it must be cleaned, once or twice per day, or everything must be in order, as the case may be. But when we think about the mosque, well, it's okay, it's okay, it's only dust, it's only dirt, it's only mud, it's only this thing and that thing, and we don't worry about the garbage, we take note at a later date. So we have this sort of dichotomy in terms of the way that we do things and the way that we consider things. And that is something that we need to become, we need to realize that we need to change. And the way that the change is that the way that what we want for ourselves, we should want for everything else that it is that we do. So that's something which is important. I think the other thing about doing things and where we're starting for is that we should remember that it's not just about ourselves, what we want to do and what we want to see, but it's also about what others want to see as well. Because what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was doing from the very beginning, you could have said, well, look, he received the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this gets going, let's spread. But what he was doing in essence was that he received the message, but he realized early on that, look, I can't do everything that is required of this message. I need help. And therefore, what he was building in a sense was a team from the very beginning. So he built a team with people with different skill sets, different capabilities, and he knew what the strengths of the team were, and he knew the role that different team players had to make. And therefore, working as a team is important. And, one of the things that we can think about, I've always, one of my teachers would always tell us this, that, when we do things as individuals, then we can only achieve one thing. But then if 2 people come together, it's almost as if you can achieve 11 things. So 3 people come together, you can achieve 111 things, which is 111 things, which is a really an amazing way to think about what it is that the group can achieve as opposed to what it is that the individual can achieve.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Riza. Thank you. So my next question is, does giving one's all to Allah require one to give the best or just give what one feels like giving? I know you've touched on this when you were saying that, I think you said something along the lines of, I don't know the exact quote, but the best of deeds is the one that's consistent. So I guess it's maybe elaborating a bit more on that point. So just to repeat the question, does giving one's all to Allah require one's best or just to give what you feel like at any given time?
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think in a sense, you've already answered that question, but it is about, you know, giving one's best and to do it consistently. It's very interesting that when you think about one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us to beware of is to beware where to the point where you know, that fatigue sort of, you know, enters into what it is that you do, you know, or something where you become, you know, you get into a sense of heedlessness, or you become somebody who, you know, if when you keep on doing the same thing over and over again, you at some point in time, you're going to fatigue, you're going to become less conscious of what it is that you do, you become more prone to making mistakes. And it's the same for all of us. We're doing something at work, and it could be that something that we love to do at work. But the more you at it, and the more you are not going to be able to perform at the same level. And it's the same, you know, prayer could have been something that we could be doing, we could have been asked to do as we learned from the Mi'raj, that we could have been doing 50 times per day, but we didn't. You know, it went down to 5 times per day. And the fact is that we need to enter into our faith and do things in such a way that we are doing a variety of things, but we're also taking breaks in terms of what it is that we do, not overburdening ourselves. And if we do so, then we would be able to deliver, when we do so, the best that we can do, because we need to always be in a refreshed state. There is a reason why, for instance, you know, even from work, we have annual leave, or we take holidays, or there is a weekend that we take off, because we will never be able to function at that same level all of the time. You can try it for some time, yes, it will work, but not in the long term. And the same goes, you know, you might love, let's say, reading Quran, but then you can't, you know, then you must stop. You know, the fact that we have been advised that when we read the Quran, that to read only so much at a time helps us to realize that if it is that we were to do beyond that, we would be going above and beyond and exerting ourselves and not giving due attention and regard to what it is that we do. And so it's not, so in Islam, what we are not necessarily after is that of the quantity of things, but rather the quality of things. And quality comes with, you know, with great preparation, with taking our time, with doing things in an orderly, systematic fashion, for reviewing things, or for looking carefully at feedback in terms of what it is that you do, learning the lessons, implementing solutions, making improvements, and then becoming better and better. And that's why the great scholar from Bosnia, with the former president, rahimahullah, Alija Izetbegovic, one of the things that he says in his book, Islam Between East and West, is that he says that Islam is a state of becoming rather than a state of being, that it's almost as if it's something that you are seeking to become, and therefore it's a state of continuous renewal and becoming better all of the time. So yeah, I think those are some of the things, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, what will happen if one decides not to give anything or their all in the cause of Allah?
That's a really interesting question, because if you don't do it for Allah, then the question becomes, who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for yourself? And in the short term, you might find reward, which is there. It could be the acknowledgement of others. It could be that you become famous for what it is that you do. But in the long term, will there be a lasting reward? And the reward that we seek is one which is lasting, one which is beyond the short-term gain of this world, but rather that of the akhirah. And therefore, when we do things as Muslims, the question that we always should be asking ourselves is, when it is that I do what it is that I do, will I be able to gain that measure of success both in this world and the next world? And ultimately, where is the real goal? What is the real priority? Is the priority this world, or is the priority the next world? And to give you an example of that is that sometimes we do things, and sometimes people may not necessarily acknowledge what we do. So we're doing something, let's say every morning, when the garbage is about to be collected, you decide, well, look, I want to help my neighborhood. I want to make sure that everybody has their garbage out by their roadside so that the litter can be collected. And you realize that your neighbor is not paying as attentive as you in terms of fulfilling this particular task. So you decide, well, look, what I'll do is I'll just take their garbage out for them, and which is something quite good, something quite noble. But then you keep on taking it out for them and hoping that at some stage that they will recognize that this is something that ought to be done, and somebody else is helping them, but maybe they're not acknowledging it. You're not getting the due measure of acknowledgement that you deserve. And they themselves are now taking it for granted. Well, we don't need to worry about it. Our neighbors will take it out for us. So it's about thinking about, well, what is who are you looking for, from commendation from? Is it from Allah or is it from others? And ultimately, it's from both parties. But it's knowing that what it is that you do, that your reward, inshallah, will be secure with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think the other thing is that when we begin to do things for other than that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the question is the measure of barakah, is the measure of this divine blessing, is it going to remain with us and in terms of what it is that we do? And that is something which is important, because not necessarily when you engage in something which you deem to be Islamic in nature, it could be, let's say, a dawah event, doesn't mean that it's been done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There could be ulterior motives and intents in all things. And therefore, sometimes you might be doing something which you consider to be Islamic in nature, but it could be that you're losing the barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because there is so much divisiveness, there is no harmony in the team, that people, even though they come together, they seemingly doing something which is noble, that they're arguing, that they are backbiting, that they're slandering each other, they're not respecting each other. So at the end of the day, if you're doing all of those things, you might be getting reward on one hand, but you may be committing some wrong on the other. So at the end of it, what are you going to be left with? So that's something to think about. I think the one of the things about not doing things for Allah, the incident in Tabuk, in the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was really very interesting, and there are so many lessons to be learned from the Tabuk incident. And the incident I speak of is one where so the Muslims in Medina, they realized that, hold on, the Prophet is calling for us to go on the Tabuk expedition. And we have to travel such long distances that it could be that many of us will not return. Many of us will not return. We might well die on our way. So there were many And so that, so a lot of them, you know, they had to sort of muster as much resources as they needed to go on that trip. But there was something interesting taking place in Medina at that time, was that it was the harvest time, that their crops was had to be cultivated, that it was the best season that they had seen for a while, that they knew what they had, and therefore, on the one hand, hold on, if we were to remain in Medina, then we will get the best of everything, as opposed to having to go on this long journey towards Tabuk, you know, towards meeting the adversaries of the Muslims. So amongst those who decided, well, look, we will stay back, there were many from amongst the munafiqun, amongst the hypocrites, but there were many from amongst some of the, there were some of the senior Sahaba, and 3 in particular, one of the hadith mentions, who decided to stay back. And you can see in a sense that they sort of contrived of reasons which they think were valid in nature, that, you know, for whatever reason, that they were coming at, so, and what happened is that the army left, and then some of them, they were behind, and then they said, well, oh, the army has already left. If we leave now, we would never be able to catch up with the army. Better it is that we stay back, or as the case may be. So it became one where they knew what they had to do. And then when the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came back, and he asked, well, you know, those who didn't go, they came to him and they gave, what was their reason for doing it? It could have been easy for each one of those 3 Sahaba to give a reason, that saying, well, look, you know, this is the excuse that we have. And many came and gave excuses, and the Prophet said, fine, that's your excuse. But these 3 in particular, they came to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and they told him the true reason, that, look, you know, we have made a serious error of judgment in terms of what we did, and what was the real reason why. And we saw the consequences of that. So it's really interesting. It's really important. I mean, in a sense, what we can say is that they faced, you know, great penalty in terms of being, in a sense, for a limited period, being excommunicated from the Muslim community, and people not being able to speak to them and so on. Now, in that sense, if you think about it, they become modeled in terms of what it is that, why it is that they should be doing what it is that they should be doing, and that led to particular consequences. A lot of times when we do things, you know, in our everyday lives, what we do find is that we don't necessarily face those same consequences. And when it is that we earn the pleasure or displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't necessarily see the immediate rewards. And we know we live in a society where we're looking for what we often term, you know, instant gratification. And instant gratification is something that if we do something, we want to see the reward there and then. And the idea of thinking about, and that is very much against the whole notion of waiting for delayed gratification in terms of the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Okay, you want what you want to get, and you want to get it now. So we need to be careful in terms of, you know, when if it is that we seek or we decide to do something other than for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether or not we will truly gain his pleasure when it is that we when we want it. And the last point I wanted to make on this is sometimes when we have our particular reasons for wanting to do a particular things in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they may then the event or the activity or the organization may have alternative or different priorities. And if the organizations have different priorities, this may not necessarily match with our priorities. See, for instance, it could be that you might be somebody who likes the limelight. So you like to be the main organizer, take the lead, be the person who is always up on the stage, having to dictate to others what needs to be done. And you've been doing it for a long time, and you do a very, very good job. You're excellent at what it is that you do. But then for as far as the survival of an organization, they might be thinking, well, look, what we do need is capacity building. We do need succession planning. We do need not the same person. We do need to expose others in our organization so that others might be, they might know these people, and that therefore it's not all reliant upon one person, but we want to be able to show that we are working as an organization, as a team, as a group, rather than as an individual. And it could be that it requires you to take a back seat, that for the next event, instead of leading from the front, you might be in the kitchen, washing the dishes or serving the food or doing another task. As much as you may not appreciate, that's not what you normally do, but this is what the situation requires. Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Rizza, for your detailed answers. So we have one more question, and this is just to prompt the audience to kindly use this time to ask any questions you have. And this will be by using the chat box feature. So if you just drop the question in the chat box, I will read it out and Dr. Rizza will deal with it. So our final question is, in engaging in dawah work, sometimes people don't execute this particular task with excellence as a result of low finances, low capacity or expertise. So could you share some anecdotes of individuals or communities, organizations that have been successful to overcome these resource challenges and at the same time delivered excellently in their tasks? And there are two parts to this question, so I'll let you deal with the first and then perhaps I'll ask the second. Or do you want me to ask the second?
Yeah, you can do.
And the second part is, could you also speak to the need for a call to actions for individuals to step forward within the Muslim community by supporting dawah groups with their time, money, and talent?
Okay. It's an interesting question, and there's a lot to talk about this sort of need for excellence. One of the common complaints that organizations have throughout the world is that when you speak to them, the first thing that they will say is that we don't have enough money. We don't have enough resources. We do not have enough people to be able to do what needs to be done. So that is something which is common. And the question is, but then it always is often remains as a complaint that people can sort of justify their mediocrity in terms of not being able to succeed. And we need as Muslims, I think our mindset needs to change in terms of we need to move beyond that. So there are a number of things that I want to suggest that we can do. And the first is that very often when people come together and we have organizations which have a lot of people, we don't have a very clear inventory of the skill sets of our people. What are their skill sets? What are their talents? What are their experiences like? How much time can they truly give? And because of this lack of inventory, because we don't even sometimes have a database of people, of not just of what their phone numbers are and their email addresses are, but in terms of what are their hobbies, what are their talents, what are their degrees in, what do they normally do on a day-to-day basis, and how can we leverage a lot of what it is that they do on a normal day-to-day basis and that they are good at in terms of what we need to do. How can we match the two together? And the other things that sometimes this becomes difficult for some because they don't see their skill sets as a set of skills which are transferable in nature, so that they can transfer their skills to another setting. So I might be a teacher and I, at a primary school level, for instance, but I don't realize that maybe I can use, these are a set of skills that I have acquired that I could put to use in another way, that I could probably lead a workshop group, or I can teach kids in a different environment, in a different place, or in the voluntary sector, as the case may be. The next thing is that what we, even though people may have skills which are transferable, what tends to happen is that sometimes those people who are skilled in particular areas are not given the opportunity to serve in those areas because maybe somebody else wants to do it, or that post is an important one and we want this person, but this person may not be the most talented or the most capable person or the most competent to be able to do it. And therefore, being able to match people accordingly is really important in terms of, so if somebody, let's say in their accountant, well, why not don't they help take up part of the treasurer's role of preparing the accounts rather than getting somebody else. Somebody else might be good, but then you have somebody who this is what they do day in, day out. So be able to match people accordingly. And what I've often realized is that when we take for granted that and we look at everybody as being equal and not realizing what their talents are, what tends to happen over time is that what we get is not of the best, and then people continuously critique, well, that account wasn't done right, it came back, or it was never, or whatever was done, that event could have been much better organized. Well, you never got the project manager involved to be able to do it properly. And so this is a huge problem that we have now. The other thing is that very often in Muslims, by and large, we tend to operate based upon our emotion. We are very emotional people. And because of our emotions, when we make decisions are often made based upon our emotions, rather than making rational, logical decisions, thinking through all the different aspects in making decisions. So it's not something which is evidence-based, but rather it's something where, look, this needs to be done and it needs to be done now. Let's just forget about everything and just get it done. Everybody come together. Let's move hand in hand and get it done, which is really great for some things, but for most things in life, it will have an impact and you may not get the desired results. So it's really important to think things through properly, and sometimes you're so willing or wanting to do things quickly that you forget to say, well, don't worry about everything else. Things will get better. Inshallah, Allah will reward us. But we don't deliver. We don't give the best of ourselves or the best product. And we don't often realize that as du'at, what it is when we share Islam with others, or when we do what we do in our dawah activities, these are like products. That in itself represents a model and an example that we are setting for others, and therefore it has to be delivered, in the best possible way. And as an example, one of the organizations I'm involved here within the UK is an organization called Faith Inspire. So in Faith Inspire, we do a lot of different type of activities, and we do a lot of capacity building. We do work with young teens. We do work in terms of outreach activities with non-Muslims. But even with non-Muslims, we decided that we wanted to come up with a course that we can introduce Islam to non-Muslims too. Now you can say, well, look, there are many courses there, just take one of them and go on with it. But we decided, well, look, we want to take our time, do it properly. So, and it took us probably better than a year to be able to come up with it. But when we took that time, there was adequate brainstorming. We brought the right set of people together with the right skill sets. It was discussed properly. We developed all of the resources that we wanted. We planned every single thing about it, even all of the training material, the presentations, the handouts, everything was done in great detail. We were very meticulous in terms of our branding and in terms of what we want to get. We looked at contingency plans. We looked at long-term follow-up. And then what we did is that we went through a period of almost 3 months trying to deliver the course to a cohort. So we selected a group to be able to trial this particular activity in and see how it worked, gain feedback, modify the program. And only after we had done that, then we said, look, after this lengthy period that we're ready to go with this particular activity. Which shows you that sometimes it takes time, but when the product comes out, product comes out the way that you would want it to go, that the slip-ups and the mistakes are limited. Another example is one where we recently launched a program called STEPS, which is a program of leadership for teens program. And it's the same process that we went through in terms of trying to develop every single thing, so even from the point of not just the material and what needs to be done and everything, but we also trained our trainers to make sure that the people who will be delivering the programs are the people who understand the program well. They understand what the objectives are. They're capable enough. They have been vetted so that that the quality of delivery will be the best. And it will be the best, and similarly for the participants, that we choose the right people to be able to train. So once you begin to do all of those things, what often tends to happen, you begin to realize it requires time. You just can't do it like that, and it requires great effort. And then everybody and your organization is looking at you and saying, well, look, you said that you were going to do it in 3 months, and 3 months is up and you haven't done it yet. Why is it? Why is that? But for people who are looking from the outside, they don't realize the amount of effort that is required to get something done, to be able to deliver it in an excellent way. I'm part of a program at the University of Liverpool where we train 5th year medical students in the things that they will experience when they enter and become junior doctors. So once they enter into a ward and they ask you the particular things, that they already understand what it is that they are meant to be doing, and they can handle things. So we've created a program it's called LifeDoc, which is one where we create scenarios, really realistic scenarios where these medical students who are about to graduate, they have to go through these scenarios, and we teach them what it is that they should do, so that when they enter onto a ward and they are asked to do something, it's not that they've never encountered it before, but it is something that they've seen before, they've done before in a training setting, and therefore the likelihood of making mistakes is lessened. But when I looked at the amount of time that we took to prepare this program, it took a huge amount of money. Of course, it was in millions of pounds to be able to get it right, and then it took a long time. It took years before the program was eventually launched. So this gives us an idea in terms of the in different sectors in our society, when things are done, the amount of time and effort and energy and resources are put into things to be able to get it done, and something that we can benefit from, inshallah. And therefore, it's important for us to realize that we should never really we should only take or eat what it is that we can chew, as the saying goes. And it is better to take on less rather than to take on more. So you can say, if you think you can do something in half an hour, say that, give me an hour. If I finish in less time, then I will then you can have half an hour to spare. Or if it is that you want me to do something, to prepare something, I think I can do it in 2 days, but maybe give me 3 or 4 days. So you put into place contingencies. So the expectation and the other is one where you would always be able to meet your expectations. There's some other points I wanted to make before I end on this. One is that, so we need to think big, as the saying goes, but act small. So think big, but also act small, and look at the way your small, and understand how your small steps are going to achieve that bigger goal. I mentioned the idea about emotions in terms of closing, that don't let your emotions get the better of you, and always, come down to that level of rationality. Be aware as Islamic workers about becoming what I would call burnt out, and the quality of your efforts becoming diluted when you begin to realize, because what tends to happen is that if somebody is good at something, or somebody has done something well, then everybody comes to them and say, well, look, you've done this so well, and you're so very good at speaking, and you're good at organizing. Why don't you organize our events for us as well? And then, you sort of so kind-hearted, you say, well, of course, I'll help you as much. I'll help you. And then you take on something, and then you take on another thing. And before you know it, you've taken on so much, and then you're trying to help everyone. But then they say, well, hold on. When you did the first activity, it was done so well, and you performed so, but now all of these that you're doing, the quality at the end of it is not the same. It's because you're not putting the same amount of effort in. So beware of, dilution of your efforts. The other thing is that, many organizations don't have, proper strategic plans that they follow, strategic and operative plans that they should be referring to, and forums for evaluation and for making changes and for adapting to situations as it arises. And that's something which is something that we need to really consider, that we need to always planning should be at the heart of what it is that we do. In working in Dawah organizations, do not neglect the company that you have. One of the most important things about working together is a spirit of teamwork, is a spirit of that ukhuwa, that brotherhood. When we talk about the Sahaba and we use the word Sahaba, we are not talking about individuals. We are talking about a group of people who worked with each other, who and who functioned as a team. That's what made the Sahaba such an extraordinary group of people, because they were a team. They were people who respected each other. They were people who sometimes, even when there was conflict, they were able to resolve those conflicts, very quickly, because they understood well what it is that, that needs to be done. They knew where the priority lied. The priority lied in trying to mend disputes and make resolution, among ourselves, because that's the nature of people when they come together. And the other thing is that, and the last point I want to make is that of trying to recognize the contribution of others, and especially of those who have been there in the past. Often what I find is that for young people, they may not have experienced what came before in terms of what their great-grandfather did, or their great-grandparents did, or the sheikh who is now 90 years old and who can't do as what he did before. And we tend not to appreciate their stories and their sacrifices and what they went through. And we think that we have all of the answers in this 21st technological world. But it's important to be able to learn to respect others and learn to respect what others have done. Because at the end of the day, what they may have done and the spirit of sacrifice and the spirit of sincerity, what they may have accomplished, you may not become close to it as much as, that you might like. So respecting the contribution of others is something which is really important. And for all of us who are here, I hope that there are some things which have been said which will encourage you to want to and motivate you to want to begin to do something, want to begin to make a change, want to begin to, no matter who you are, that you can make a difference. And it's that sense of realization that it starts with you. Everything starts with you. And once you realize what needs to be done, then you find a friend who thinks like you as well. And then you work hand in hand, and there's so much which can be accomplished. and there's so much that needs to be done. So I hope, inshallah, and pray that all of us, we benefit from some of these examples, and that we work hand in hand and realize that the impact of what we do, sometimes we don't see that ripple and how it affects others as well. I mean, what you are doing at MICA, believe it or not, others are looking on, even us in the Caribbean, we are looking on as well to see what you are doing in Nigeria, and we are learning from you as well. So it's important for us to know that we live now in a global village, and we are part of one ummah, and as much as we do, inshallah, it will help everyone in the long run, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Riza. Thank you very much for that. I have about 3 questions. The first one is, what are action steps that one can take to give their all to Allah? I believe you covered this when you spoke about practical steps, but could you summarize again, please? Perhaps this person joined later.
Okay. Whenever you do something, the very first thing that you have to ask yourself, what it is I want to do, is it already being done? So if I wanted to set up a business, the first thing I will do some market research. And market research will tell me, well, look, is there a need for, I think it's important, I think this product will sell, but really, would people buy the product? What do the customers at the end of the day think about this particular product? So that's the very first thing. So and a lot of times we don't do our market research properly. So I am a Dawah organization. I want to do this. Okay, let's say, for instance, I want to institute a mentoring program for the workers who are there as part of my organizations, in terms of capacity building and sharing of expertise and experience and so forth and so on. That's let's say one of our priorities. So we want to do something. I mean, and everybody says, yeah, it's great. But then, are there other organizations doing it? Can we learn from the experiences of others? Was it ever done in an organization before? And what were the results of it? Or if it is that it was, then why hasn't it continued? What were the lessons that ought to be learned? So we live, and in this global village that we live in, what we will find is that whatever it is that we want to do, invariably somebody somewhere has also done the same. The next thing I wanted to highlight is the need for us to be able to not just look at what it is that is being done within Islamic organizations, but there are other institutions, there are other bodies, there are also other professionals are doing things. And therefore, as Muslims, we have a responsibility to learn from others. And what I mean by that, we have to be able to draw upon expertise from other areas. They may not necessarily be Muslims. They may not, it could be they are from other faiths or other different groups, as the case may be, but learn from the experiences of everyone before we do things, rather than just, on the spur doing things. The next thing is that we need to, we always need, and I've come back to this point about setting up, strategic plans and doing things properly. Each one of us needs to know the basic tools of strategic planning and of event, of managing projects and project organization and project management. And so therefore, when we do things, we do things in a way which is, born out of knowledge, expertise, experience, and something which we know has worked in the past, rather than something done in a haphazard way. So that's something which is very important. The other point that I mentioned is that of the idea of when it is that we decide whatever it is that we want to do, to be wary about the need to have niyyah or ikhlas. I talked about doing little at a time and doing with a sense of ihsan. I spoke about the importance of, as much as du'at, that you want and you feel a sense of obligation towards helping others, there's an equilibrium, there's a sense of balance that needs to be struck. And that balance is between your own self-development and that of the need to develop others. And very often what I find happening is that there's always an imbalance between the two. Often some people that they are so enthusiastic about wanting to do things that you ask them at the end of 5 years, what have you done? Oh, I've been able to organize, let's say, 50 programs, 50 educational programs. But when you look at them and ask them, well, of these 50 educational programs, what were you able to learn? How have you developed? How have you grown? How has it made an impact and a difference in terms of your understanding and practice? Then you begin to realize, hold on, there's a mismatch there. Or there are others who believe, then there are some people who believe, for instance, I call them sometimes professional students. They are so keen to want to learn and want to listen to webinars and to attend seminars and to attend workshops of great knowledgeable people, that you ask them to do anything. Can you help in this thing? No, I can't, because I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm learned enough. You need to get someone else. Not realizing that that's not the prophetic methodology. The prophetic methodology, when you say, the prophetic methodology is one where you learn a little and then you implement it, then you begin to share it. That's what he left us with at the end of the day. And that methodology is one that we need to show in our lives. So the best way to know that you've known something or you know something is by practicing it and by sharing it. If you're able to articulate and sharing it, there is no better way than it's even better than practicing it, because practice only shows practice. There could be limitations. Sharing it means that you've understood not just the limitations, but you have solutions for limitations and for problems. So that's something which is which you ought to think about as well. So so beware of that emotional high I talked about, and realize that what you want to do at the end of the day when you do your Islamic work and you do your dawah work and you work for Allah is that you want to work as a team. And the priority at the end of the day is on team building and getting that team to work as a cohesive unit. If you find that what you're doing is affecting the function of the team, then it is not just, it may mean that you need to consider what it is that you do as well. So what you do might be good, but it could be that you need to lessen it, you do it less frequently, but you want to be able to team to be able to function as a unit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reza. And we have one final question, inshallah, and before we close in about 10 minutes. So my experience whilst I was so this is from Brother Shams. My experience whilst I was working in Oxford City a few years ago is that many Muslims, usually Pakistani males that he met, take the approach of free living, including engaging in crime. However, once they get to the age of 40, they go on Hajj and they take a new life, frequent the masjid while building on the financial gains, usually from their previous corrupt life. He's always wondered why. And his question is it possible for one to give all to Allah, including the proceeds of crime, corruption, and oppression after one has repented with Hajj or Umrah pilgrimage?
I think a lot of this happens because of cultural practices that people, they sort of have that sense of belief that, when they are young, they can do what it is that they like. It's the opportunity to experiment, it's a time for experimentation. Don't worry about things. Because sometimes some ethnic groups, you find that, for instance, they treat females different from the way that they treat males. So males are given a lot more the luxury to do what it is that they like, to experiment, and whereas females, no. You can't do that. You need to behave in a particular way. And I think some of these cultural practices which are not the best. We need to help change people gradually over time. And it could be that the way that we change people is to be able to change their children, to get to the children and change them at an early age. And I think that's where the real change is going to come from. So on the one hand, you will have to work with what you have in terms of if these people, for whatever reason, that's what they believe, this is where they are now, then you have to deal with them and you have to work with them with what they, and then the results of whatever is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to be able to change the system, and because I think it's a systematic problem and a cultural problem, to be able to change that whole thing, you need to be able to work with children, and you need to be able to work with those who are the leaders and those who are the educators, because the leaders and the people who lead, these are the ones who are sort of embedding within the communities these type of ideas. So this has to change, and the only way to do it is to be able to get people to think differently. And to be able to think differently, you need to be able to start from an early age, because some of these practices will not disappear automatically overnight. It will take time, but it's important for us to be able to deal with it. So the question becomes, well, if somebody wants to do something, then you have to assume that who they are, that what they're doing is something which is pure in its nature, and then work with them accordingly. Now, what tends to happen is that very often when people join and they volunteer to work in organizations, what we do find is that they may have their own motives. And as an organization and as people, we need to be able to recognize the limitations of others as well. And not everybody is like ourselves. So therefore, we need to be able to work with what we have. And what we will find is that over time, people, in terms of what it is that they do, how it is that they do it, the intent of what their motives behind what it is that they do, will over time become reformed and become purified, and they will begin to better understand how to do things purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even for us some of us who may think that whatever it is that we do it only for Allah, we may soon realize that this is not always the case. And maybe sometimes we do have, mixed intents in terms of what it is that we do. So it's something that we have to continuously reflect upon and build on, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Reza, for all your responses. We pray that Allah continues to increase you in knowledge. We pray that He blesses you, everything that you do in the community, and we pray for the best for you and your family. So that brings us to a close for today's seminar. Before I completely close, can I ask you to please make dua for us?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Reza. Before we close completely, we're going to do a short poll where we ask the audience what they've gained from today's seminar. So everyone in the audience, could I ask you kindly to please follow the link that's in your chat box, Mentee, and then please enter this passcode 38480114 if it is requested. And please just put a couple of sentences, words, just explaining what you have gained from today's lecture. You can also use the chat box if you're unable to access the mentee poll for whatever reason. I think it's always nice to see like people's reflections after the seminar. So we ask that you kindly engage with this poll. It shouldn't take too long, and it won't take too much of your time. So kindly engage with the poll, please. It's good feedback for us as well, and the speaker. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes before we end. And just as an announcement, next week, Sunday, inshallah, I hope this is correct, but we'll be having Sister Habiba Balogun, who will be speaking to us about getting yourself promoted. So that's next week, Sunday, inshallah. So please keep an eye out for what's it called? Details about that event. So just a couple of words about what you've gained from today's event. I think for me, although it's something that I've always known, but it's just this idea of whatever you're going to do, just do it consistently. So I'm happy that Dr. Riza reminded us of that today. Learn, practice, share. Think big, start small. Yeah, alhamdulillah, that's a good one. Consistency is key, yes. Prioritizing quality over quantity. Yep, I love that too. And not being burnt out. Because sometimes we struggle to say no, but sometimes saying no is actually the best course of action, especially if you know that the quality will be compromised if you say yes. So yeah, I really like that reflection. One more minute and then we'll close. Planning and not being burnt out. Yep, I really like that one as well. Alhamdulillah, was good. Learned about putting ihsan before you do anything. Through the topic, though the topic was a bit technical, the doctor was able to do justice to it. Gained a lot, alhamdulillah. Great. Thank you to everyone who's participated. Oh, okay, skill audit of members. Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. Zainab, I think we can stop sharing and we can close. Again, Dr. Riza, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much on behalf of MICA. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you. All right, I think we can close now.